Welcome to the Neurostimulation Podcast. I'm Michael Passmore, Clinical Associate Professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. The Neurostimulation Podcast is all about exploring the fascinating world of neuroscience and clinical neurostimulation in particular. We look at the latest research breakthroughs, we have discussions with interesting people, and we consider how research breakthroughs are being translated into real-world treatments that can improve health and well-being. This podcast is separate from my clinical and academic roles and is part of my personal effort to bring neuroscience education to the general public free of charge. I would like to emphasize that the information shared in this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and not medical advice or a substitute for professional medical guidance. Today's episode is presented by ZipStim Neurostimulation. ZipStim is the neurostimulation clinic that I operate. You can find out more about our programs at zipstim.com. That's zipstim.com. Today I had a conversation with Steven Zeller. Steven is an entrepreneur. He's very interested in biotech and particularly the interface between biotech and neuroscience. We had a wide-ranging discussion today about brain-computer interfaces in particular, and Steven shared his wealth of knowledge about the individual companies that are pushing the frontier of innovation and technology with respect to neuroscience and biotech and brain-computer interfaces in particular. So stay tuned. It's a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure that you're really going to enjoy it as much as I did. So stay tuned. It's a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it as much as I did. Welcome back to the Neurostimulation Podcast, where we explore the cutting edge of neuroscience, clinical neurostimulation, technology, human performance, health, and wellness. Today, I'm joined by someone who truly embodies the entrepreneurial mindset, Steven Zeller. Steven is a first-generation millionaire entrepreneur who has built multiple successful businesses across real estate, health, fitness, e-commerce, and business consulting. But beyond business, he has a deep passion for advancing human civilization through technological innovation. In this episode, we'll explore his journey from struggle to success, his insights on scaling businesses, and the technologies that will define the future, in particular, brain-computer interfaces. Steven, welcome to the Neurostimulation Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Mike, this should be a stimulating conversation, no pun intended. I look forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
That's awesome. I love it. Maybe if you could start by helping us understand a bit about your background, your journey, and how you've come to this point where you have this specific interest in the technology that represents the brain-computer interface in particular.
Sure, absolutely. I was always interested in the human body and anatomy, biology, and the human brain specifically. So I was at a turning point at one point in my career. This was after my first couple of startups, and I had seen some early success. I was at a kind of a crossroads of, do I go through 14 plus years of school to become a neurosurgeon, which I know it fascinates me. I really would enjoy that path. However, I chose to maintain the journey I was on, which is entrepreneurship, because it gives me a little bit more flexibility and takes the inhibiting factor of limiting what I can do and the impact that I can make. So that was what went into my thought process. And ironically, Mike, now I'm in an amazing position where I get to have best of both worlds. I get to marry the two and really use and leverage my entrepreneurial endeavors and experience to actually make a difference with focusing on my passion, which is technology.
Yeah, that's really cool. That must be at the point where you're describing where you get the best of both worlds. That must be so rewarding just to have had the different paths that were open to you at different points in the past, but choosing the path that you took and then recognizing now that in fact that worked out for the best and that you have this flexibility now. That sounds like a fantastic position to be in.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, Mike. There were many times, especially through the failures, the hard times, which is an inevitable part of the entrepreneurial journey. You start to wonder, right? Did I make the right decision? I away from the tried and true secure path that guarantees a certain level of success, and I chose the riskier option. Did I make the right choice? So I wrestled with that many times throughout my career, especially when you have the roller coaster ride of failure and success. It's the thing that I always like to say, and you can agree with this or give me an opposing viewpoint. However, I always say that success is not a linear course. Success is something where you get your butt kicked from time to time. You have to experience losses. And I think loss is part of the journey that is not only inevitable, but necessary. It builds so much character. It builds something that I did not have when I had early success, which was humility. You think you know it all when you hit some early on success. So I think going through the journey that I have really puts me in a position not only from a financial perspective, but from a character mindset perspective of, okay, now I have X amount of experience. I can leverage that to actually make a difference.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's so important for people who are watching and listening who perhaps are earlier on in the journey and have ideas about a startup, or they're inclined to think about starting a business or trying to figure out how to integrate perhaps a career in healthcare with some entrepreneurship. I know certainly I've struggled with that, but the idea of just persevering is very important and heartening to hear. It reminds me of this quote, I'm not sure who, and I think I read it in Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And maybe it's an Elon quote, who knows? By now it's an urban myth probably, but this idea about, as a founder or as someone who's really pushing in an entrepreneurial way but has a lot of uncertainty, is that I think the quote was something like, you find yourself chewing on glass and staring at the abyss, and it's, what do I do now?
Yes, that is such a good quote. I have heard it, but I'm in the same boat as you. I can't attribute it to a specific individual. However, it's a good one and it's not incorrect.
Right. So I'm interested to know, do you think would have been your real first win as an entrepreneur?
I got some early success in real estate. It wasn't my first business, but early on in my career, I did scale a relatively successful, obviously success is relative in and of itself, but I was able to scale in a very short period of time, within about 18 months of launch, a ancillary services connection company, which actually helped integrated into the process to simplify a homeowner's transition process, essentially. So all of those tasks that kind of pile on when you're purchasing, selling a home, you're moving, you really don't think about that until it's go time, right? So you have a closing period of 30 days in which to get everything in place. That's okay. What do I need to do? Go down the checklist. I've got to hire movers. I need to connect the gas, water, sewer, trash, electric. What's the TV situation like? This was back when TV was actually a thing, prior to streaming everything, which was ironic. Cable packages, internet service, home security. So we had a service that integrated into that process, simplified everything, gave you all of your options as a home buyer or home. And you could do everything in one consolidated phone call, one consolidated process. It was free to the user, and I utilized backend monetization to essentially bypass the sales process. And that was probably one of my earliest, what I would consider successes. And then just took that, I ran that for about 3 years, and then took that success and moved on to other industries.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really interesting. It's interesting, I know, like concepts for someone like me who has minimal training in business. Although these days, if I'm finding the AI is super useful as a business partner, it's saving me tons of money in terms of avoiding or not having to hire an MBA, right? It's like an MBA in your pocket. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who said it. It might have been another Elon quote, but I love hearing the person that says, I have 8 MBAs and I don't have any of them. I never went to school, but I've hired 8 MBAs. So I love that quote. It's, oh, okay. As long as you have a concept, if you are the entrepreneur that has the gumption to actually get started, to actually make a winning idea and take it from concept to reality and actually persevere through all the inevitable hardships, the MBAs will come to you. To your point, AI is an incredible tool that we did not have access to just a few years ago that really is turning the industry on its head. If you think about it from, hey, I've got a concept, you can understand how to leverage the prompts. ChatGPT, you can use Llama. There's so many different platforms now that are all competing. DeepSeek, don't want to throw that one out there too prematurely, but there's all of these platforms and tools that can readily spit out a business plan for you, give you actionable content, actionable steps. They can actually build out your entire business model for you. That's just something that didn't exist prior to. And if you wanted to learn anything for the first time in human history, we have access to a plethora of information at a few keystrokes.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And I like that term that you use, gumption, because again, for people who are interested, who aren't sure, but have a passion, have a vision, having that, as you say, gumption is a good word to just dive in and just follow this kind of idea. I love this idea of the intuition. There's something that's driving you towards. I think this is what has brought humans to the point where we're at, where those of us that I think we all do to a certain extent have this kind of glimmer that we see. We get an idea or we see something and it sparks something inside of us. And I think for people to be recognizing that and to not be afraid to follow that is a really important thing.
Absolutely. I think everyone has ideas. And obviously, don't know that for a fact because don't have the ability to peer into every single human's brain. Some people, they may be idealists, but all jokes aside, I believe that every single human has the capabilities, they have the ideas, but for some reason or another, they do not have the drive to see it through. It could come to them in a dream. That would be a really good idea. And then all of a sudden, 3 years down the road, they never acted on it because they had self-doubt. They thought it would be too hard. They didn't want to give up their security of their 9-to-5 job. For whatever reason, they didn't act on it. And then later they see their idea come to fruition and make millions for someone else. I think that everyone has the idea machine. The idea factory, which we're going to get into here shortly, is the human brain. The ability to actually put fear aside, put analysis paralysis aside of how, right? And actually pull the trigger is something that I feel the vast majority of humanity lacks. I personally, this is just my perspective, I don't see that's changing anytime. There is a reason I do follow the 80-20 rule pretty soundly. It works. It's very applicable in almost everything except for physics. I do believe that will continue. Now, I also believe that humanity will dramatically eradicate poverty, will eradicate most diseases. Like humanity will, as a whole, continue to elevate. So I don't think there's going to be as much disparity in the future. That said, the 80-20 principle will always apply, meaning the ideas that are actually going to come through to fruition are going to be the ones who actually execute those ideas.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that optimistic outlook, and it makes sense 100% what you're saying around the 80-20. It's unfortunate, I think, partly because of how humans are wired to be more risk averse from an evolutionary perspective. And I think that probably, as you say, it's hard to escape that tendency to want to just stick with what's safe and predictable. But yeah, for sure. I think it is also, I think, a good thing to encourage people to follow their dreams. And it sounds kind of cliche, but at the end of the day, I think what I work with a lot of seniors, and you hear stories in the news and research studies that talk a bit about what do people in their later years regret the most. And I think one thing is not having kept up with social connections, but the other thing I think is not having followed one's early dream as soon or as hard as one maybe would have otherwise, right?
Yeah, Mike, I think that would be one of the saddest things for me had I not chosen the path that I did. And there are many regrets that I've done, many mistakes that I've made, but I'm actually glad that those transpired. But I think you are correct in saying that. I believe for myself that if I got to the end of my days, so let's say theoretically we don't within my lifetime achieve some sort of biological immortality or longevity extension significantly, which I do believe from a genetic perspective is actually feasible. Let's say that doesn't transpire and I'm on my deathbed. I think my biggest regret would have not been taking the action and chasing my dreams regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think most people would agree that so it's a kind of a voice that is in the back of a lot of people's mind, and sometimes they do their best to ignore it, and sometimes they pay attention to it, as you say, whether it's in dreams or otherwise. But it's interesting because I love the way the direction is going in for the conversation in terms of these contemporary issues, biotechnology, brain computer interfaces. I'm curious, what in particular are you most interested in these days in terms of technology that seeks to advance human civilization? What particular areas of that innovation are you most excited about?
Yeah, so as a tech investor and enthusiast, a futurist, so to speak, self-proclaimed, of course, I always look at what sectors have the highest potential or probability for dramatically improving humanity or accelerating the advancement into the cosmos, or the future. Some of the biggest sectors that I think have that potential are really what I'm focusing on. Now, there's so many amazing projects out there. It's really hard to hone in on what's going to make the most significant change in the world. Brain computer interfaces happen to be one of those. The implications, the applications, the possibilities are off limit. Now, so are the risks, right? There's a lot which I think will lend well to this conversation, really focusing, drilling down on who are the players in the space to watch, where are we at right now, what's going on from an international perspective, where can we take this? What are the medical applications versus commercial applications, right? Wearables versus insertables, or don't want to say injectables quite yet. Send some nanobots crawling through your bloodstream. But brain computer interface, the BCI industry is one of those things that I think, because it's in your face, it
Mhm.
is so invasive. I believe there's going to be a slow period of progression of advancement. The only inhibiting factor is the FDA and other regulatory agencies that are there to obviously protect us. They are closely analyzing that risk. Long-term human studies are necessary. So because of that, there are other fields that I think will explode very quickly. AI is obviously one of those. If you look at the progression of AI itself, incredible. There is nothing to inhibit the continuation of that. They're trying to from a regulation perspective, but it's just not going to happen. Whereas, just to give you an idea, and then we can reel it back, but from a broader approach or perspective, some of these sectors that I think will make the biggest impact are brain computer interfaces, AI, machine learning as well, but primarily AI integration into the workforce, meaning AI
Mhm.
agents, and from a physical standpoint, AI integration into robotics, which we're already seeing happening. And we're seeing it in assembly lines in manufacturing, BMW and AWS. A lot of big companies are starting pilot programs, testing this out from a very early stage. But I think that is something that's going to make a dramatic difference for humanity as well. Space exploration and systems, propulsion systems, things like that. And then energy is another big sector I'm watching as well.
Yeah, that really makes sense. Obviously, there's a lot of interconnected dependence there, especially the energy side, with the requirements that are going to be there to be able to power the AI and the tech initiatives. But it's super interesting because in terms of if we're thinking about what are the technologies that could improve human functioning, human health and wellness, it's amazing. I recently saw a video with this robotic exoskeleton that was helping an individual who was
Yep.
paraplegic to walk. So I guess it's whether it's that from an external perspective or the Neuralink approach with more of an internal stimulation perspective. It's so fascinating what's on the horizon.
Absolutely. I think some of the biggest things, obviously, talking about the tech is one thing. Talking about the results from that tech is really what's exciting. So I don't want to glaze over that too quickly. I honestly believe that this is not science fiction. I believe that we will completely eradicate cancer. Most forms of cancer, obviously, there's genetic and epigenetics. There are, for example, we can genetically make, if you are born with a 50% chance of acquiring colon cancer or lung cancer, breast cancer, we can actually take that predisposition away from a genetic perspective right now. We
Mhm.
have the capability. That is incredible, the technology that we have. Now, obviously, if we take that away and you start smoking 2 packs a day, that's going to be on you. But so it's not like we're going to completely be able to eradicate cancer ongoing because there's going to be pollutants, there's going to be other factors throughout your life that can actually give you cancer. However, the ability to cure it from a genetic and epigenetics perspective is absolutely going to be a barrier that we cross very soon. We will be able to expand our footprint outside of our environmental confinement, Earth, very soon. That's something that's going to happen, I think, a lot faster than most people realize. I think in the 2030s, we will have boots on the moon, and they will stay there, stationed there. We will be exploring asteroids and potentially mining them. We will have a presence on Mars, though that will be very limited. I don't think you're going to see a city on Mars in the next decade, obviously, but it's very exciting to see us expand for the first time our footprint into the cosmos. Obviously, the propulsion systems and space tech that we referred to earlier has to come a long way forward to give us interplanetary capabilities, as opposed to just sticking with our own solar system. Don't want to go off on too big a tangent there, but I think some of those things are going to be the biggest applications, the biggest changes that we see from a BCI perspective. You're correct. I think we're already curing. I shouldn't say cure. We're bypassing biological limitations, meaning if you lose the ability to walk, you're paraplegic, quadriplegic, we will be able to tap directly into your motor cortex and send those signals and bypass that disability directly by tapping into your brain. That is an incredible thing. One of the biggest problems that I see is we're still at a very rudimentary stage of understanding how the human brain works. I believe there's a potential that the brain is quantum in nature, but obviously believing it and having a theory about it and actually putting it to the test and proving it, that hypothesis is what we're trying to accomplish now. So we're still in the early stages of understanding how the brain works, and we're tapping into it. So that is one of the biggest drawbacks and dilemmas for me when I'm looking at this from a longevity standpoint. Is it's amazing to hone into we know how to bypass this disability by sending signals from this area of the brain. However, we don't exactly understand how that signal is, where it's actually originating from. We know where it's sending out from and how to tap into that, send those signals, stimulate the brain, but we're still at a loss for an overall comprehension of how the brain actually works.
Yeah, no, for sure. What's exciting as well, though, is that it's just the pace of the innovation, really, if you think about it, because part of what, even if you talk about the space exploration piece that you were referring to there, and then you think about how for decades under NASA, there really wasn't much happening. And I know at least in a more of a bureaucratic public healthcare system like here, it's challenging to have innovation push the frontier of what clinical practice can offer to people. But I think the real benefit of biotech, obviously with some oversight and necessary safety regulations and the necessary research to ensure that innovations are safe and likely to be effective, that it really allows people to benefit from the technology advancing as quickly as it can do. And that seems likely to happen a lot more quickly than it might if it's left to governments and more, what would you say, bureaucracy that gets more easily bogged down.
Oh, yes. Privatizing it, I think, is one of the biggest reasons for the rapid pace of advancement.
Definitely, yeah. So if we talk about brain-computer interface, so BCI, as you say, it really is astonishing to me. Just when it was about a year or so ago, when they released the video of the first gentleman that had the implant there.
Arnold?
Yeah, exactly. And gosh, I was just captivated by that. So obviously, it looks as though it could completely change the way that spinal cord injury rehabilitation works, and in fact further, like how I suppose we in general interact with technology. Do you feel that this kind of innovation is more of a distant dream, or are we close to mass adoption? Obviously somewhere in between that.
The tech is advancing extremely quickly. The only inhibiting factors, again, especially when you're talking about invasive procedures, is going through FDA clearance. You have to go through a significant cumbersome process, right? Yeah. For good reason. So there's a couple things to think about here. So one aspect of this is the approach, right? So are we talking about medical applications versus commercialization. So adoption is going to first be for medical purposes, right? So there's a reason that they're going for medical first. And there are companies that are going for more gaming, more commercial things as well. But those are more wearable devices as opposed to implants. I think it's going to be a progression. If you wanted to talk about time frame of when this is going to actually be rapidly integrated into and adopted, because that's the other thing. There's going to be a significant amount of people that are like, whoa, hold on. Just because it's safe or the government says it's safe and all of these human trials, like it's amazing for medical purposes, but I don't want that thing in my head yet. And I say the word yet because I think the adoption will happen very quickly, but there's going to be a threshold. It's going to go very slow at first, and then you're going to start seeing some celebrities start to pile on, and they're going to get theirs. Then a massive following. If this person did it, I'm going to do it too. And then there's going to be an inevitable shift that's going to happen so quickly, because what happens is it's going to be the same from a psychological perspective as the iPhone, right? Yeah. And you remember how that took off. You don't want to be the only person in your company that doesn't have the cutting edge technology. When you start seeing your leaders get it and you start seeing your colleagues get it, and then you are left out, even if you're hesitant, and there's going to be a significant amount of people that are hesitant. The early adopters will obviously be first in line, ready to go, screw the risks. And then there's going to be a trickle down. That trickle down is going to be a little slow, but once I say about 10%, 15% of the population has them, it will explode to 80 within, I believe, 1 to 2 years. So that's what I foresee the potential adoption process looking like on a global scale. Now, one thing that I think is going to happen first is we're really working. So the difference between wearables, right, versus implants is efficacy, right? So, and what they're capable of, what are the applications? So wearables are limited significantly. They will be good. Potential applications could be gaming, right? It could be more mental health, right? So it could be there to pick up on brain activity. It can pick up what you're feeling. It could even potentially send signals to give you a calming frequency, right? So I see that happening relatively quickly. I also think companies like Meta are going to come out with their own versions of wearable computer interfaces as well to give you some sort of accessibility into limited features. So I think that will be a gateway drug for the overall community. The harder one that is, again, the efficacy rates and the applications are significantly bigger are the implants. You're going directly in. To give you an idea, some of the big players to watch in this space, I'll give you my top 5. There are a lot of companies out there, so I am sorry for the ones I'm not listing here. Please do not hold me to it. Just do better. Neuralink, obviously, they deserve to be on this list. I don't think they are, at this time, the front runner. They are the ones that get the most attention. They weren't the first company. They're actually they were founded in 2016. BlackRock has a neurotech company a lot of people don't hear about that was founded back in 2008. And they have, I believe, 21 FDA approved projects happening right now, right? So human trials, a lot of things, and they work in collaboration with other entities as well. So they're doing a lot through BlackRock, and they have unlimited funding behind them and political power as well. So BlackRock is one that I definitely want to put on people's radar because a lot of people, nobody talks about what they're doing, but they're doing a lot in this space. Synchron is one that you might actually, have you heard of Synchron?
No.
You might actually like this. So the reason I like them is their method. So it's a minimal invasive surgical procedure. And the reason that they beat Neuralink to human trials was they developed a technology that's already in existence. So their procedure involves stent technology. Okay. So you know how a stent surgery works. You go into the heart, mesh hugs the inner lining of the vessel, holds it open. Now imagine that procedure, but going up through the jugular vein into the brain. And instead of a mesh, imagine it being an electrode mesh,
Mm.
right? So minimally invasive, already FDA approved, the process anyway. So now their human trials is frogging everyone else that is a lot more invasive, like cutting chunks of skull out, putting wires into the brain. They're doing something that's already been done for years,
Mm.
and they're just upgrading it with an electrode mesh that can send and receive signals. So
Mm.
that's the reason I like them, is their actual minimal invasive procedure that's, I think, highly effective, gives you access to bigger, broader regions of the brain as opposed to a single tap into the motor cortex, for example, with Neuralink.
Mm.
It also eliminates what I consider to be a lot of the negative potential long-term side effects, which is the brain seeing a foreign object, even if it's thinner, 10 times, 100 times thinner than a human hair. It is still a foreign object. And the brain's biological systems is going to create scar tissue around that. It's going to push it out. It is not, it's going to move it. So I think there are a lot of hurdles to the invasive procedures that require cutting chunks of skull out and implanting a chip directly into the outer lining of the brain.
Mm.
Whereas from the non-invasive jugular approach, I think that has a little bit higher efficacy and potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think it makes a lot of sense that hybrid approaches will probably will gain a lot of traction. Yeah,
I agree.
It's whether it's a combination of minimally invasive and as well as wearable, or combinations of stimulation technologies plus medication, or a variety of different approaches as far as mental health is concerned. That's certainly very interesting. But the invasive piece is really interesting as well, because, as you say, obviously there are limitations, but on the other hand, there's already a lot of history in terms of all of the many years now, decades probably, I would say, of deep brain stimulation for things like Parkinson's disease.
Yes.
And the neurosurgical expertise that's been building for those years and can be incorporated into these companies. So those were the three. So you mentioned Neuralink, the BlackRock company, and then the third company. Then what were the other two?
Precision Neuroscience. They're another approach to minimally invasive. I'm trying to remember their exact. So they're focusing on non-damaging, upgradable interfaces, right? So they have a cranial micro slit technique, right? So as opposed to taking a chunk out, it's very minimally invasive, but their focus is something that is easily upgradable through software, and it's easily interchangeable. You can remove it, you can upgrade it with hardware or software. So I like their approach. They're a little bit further behind in the race from a trial perspective, but in the early days, I like their technique. I like their systems. I think they're going to be a major player in this race. The other one is BrainGate. They got a lot of press because they did a 2024 collab with Brown, I believe, Brown University. It went viral. A man with ALS was able to speak again simply through thought, right? So they tapped into his Broca's area, I believe, is the term that's directly related to speech. And he was his thoughts, could see them loud and clear on the screen, translated it to text, speech to text, by thought waves only. Incredible. The man actually started breaking down in tears because he was unable to speak. So that they got a lot of press for that collab with Brown. Doing incredible things. They're focusing on multiple different approaches, but I think their biggest contribution is going to be in medical applications as well.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. For viewers and listeners, I can put some brief links to these various organizations in the show notes as well. And just an aside, of course, none of what we're talking about here is investment advice, just as I usually say that it's not medical advice either, but this is just for educational purposes. It's certainly very interesting. Yeah, again, in terms of this idea of a hybrid approach, and to me, in terms of just taking a step back for a second and thinking about all of these various projects, it really speaks again to the incredible nature of human ingenuity in terms of picking up on these ideas and then having that spark a new idea and then going in that direction in an entrepreneurial sense. It just really does support this idea of having an overall optimistic outlook in terms of the human potential and how things are going in this direction in the future?
Absolutely. I believe that there's two ways this can go, right? We can eradicate ourselves as a species, or we can work together and propel our species into a prosperous future. I choose on a daily basis, regardless of what's going on, what the media is propagating, what saying sex sells, but war sells harder, something like that. That's basically saying that media loves to chime in and really show you focus on the negative, not really focus. If you turn on the news, it's crazy to me that you see wars, you see this, that, you see hunger. You don't really see what you and I are talking about right now. What are the good things that are happening right now? What are the innovative projects that humans are working together on, international collaboration as well as national, international? It's incredible what we humans as a species are capable of. I believe that we will not succumb to our evil intent, and I believe that we as a species will advance together into a amazing, incredible future where we really squash the beefs that are just irrelevant, in my perspective, from religious perspectives, from regional perspectives, economics. I think that we will really come together. This will obviously take a lot of collaboration. It will take a lot of time because we as a human species, again, that what we referred to earlier, the fight or flight response, right? That human amygdala, it really is our own worst enemy, but it also, from an evolutionary perspective, is the reason that we survive. And that is that the survival of the fittest mentality is something that we have to bypass or overcome in order to achieve that prosperous future.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I think the other thing that occurred to me as you're speaking and discussing those companies that have these innovations, and you mentioned at one point just recently there about this idea of some sort of quantum effect in the brain, and it made me think of how consciousness itself is so mysterious, and there are all these contemporary theories of consciousness. And it strikes me that something like BCI, by its very nature, it's going to be manipulating consciousness, hopefully in a positive way, as you're describing. But I guess I'm wondering, in terms of things like the non-invasive, the wearables, as you say, whether it's some sort of interface with the eyes, or as you say, with some sort of either reading brain waves or somehow non-invasively influencing neuronal activity, in terms of manipulating consciousness and maybe through a quantum kind of mechanism, it's just so interesting to think about the potential that way for people to have something that's non-invasive that maybe can serve as a substitute for, say, medication for treatment of mental health problems, or optimizing their cognitive function and attention if they have a variety of attention deficit difficulties, something along those lines. It seems so promising in terms of being able to help people who may be searching for other strategies in terms of optimizing their health and wellness.
Absolutely. Some of those, again, there's a lot of players in that space as well, but a couple, just to throw out some names, because I love name dropping, some of the people that are really standouts in any sector, right? Kernel is doing extremely well in the wearable space. Neurable is another one. I like the name. I'm actually a little jealous that they stole that name. Neuro and wearable. Fantastic. Good job, guys. But those are a couple players in the space. Again, Meta, I know that they are working on a project. I have not taken a look at it yet. If you guys want to send that my way, I will take a look, by the way. But so those are kind of the front runners that I would take a look at from a wearables perspective. Some of them are focused, like I said, on medical applications from a mental health perspective or from a gaming perspective. But I think healthcare definitely has big ramifications for brain stimulation. And that could be receiving reading signals and giving you a, hey, here's how you're doing today, right? Versus sending signals. Now, sending signals, I think, has a higher probability of affecting change in place of or in complement to pharmaceuticals. So going the pharmaceutical routes, a lot of people are getting to the place where they want to go the Eastern methodologies. They want to practice yoga. They want to do things that do not require pumping 10 pills a day, right? Just to reach a specific mindset. shift. So the ability to complement that or completely replace pharmaceuticals from a brain stimulation perspective with a non-invasive wearable, I agree with you. I think that is on the horizon, and I think it's rapidly approaching. I also think that it will achieve commercial viability faster than the implants will.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, and people who've watched or listened to previous episodes will know that I'm running a neurostimulation clinic called ZipStim, and so we're offering transcranial direct current stimulation for treatment of fibromyalgia and migraines, with other indications on the horizon. So it's an example of the technology that we're talking about that's becoming increasingly available from a clinical perspective for treatment of various neuropsychiatric problems. 100%. No, and I'm not surprised to hear that there are many other companies that are looking at this for various different applications. It also makes me think about the ethical considerations, right? In terms of, yes, of course, to help people who have illness, who need treatment options. But it reminds me of how there was the controversy around cloning, whenever it was 10 or 15 years ago, with the breakthroughs in genetic science. And then these kinds of mad scientist experiments about cloning. And so governments had to crack down and put regulations out there to prevent,
of course,
what would you say, unethical experiments around cloning. So I wonder what your thoughts are around this potential thing happening again now for these technologies like the brain-computer interfaces, and particularly in this age of AI, where, who knows how that combination, it doesn't take too much of an imagination to think about ways in which that could go badly wrong.
Of course. And even if it did require the imagination, that imagination is readily available in a plethora of books that you can read of how similar catastrophic events that transpire due to something similar to what we're referring to. My personal take is you have to look at it from a pro-con perspective. I personally believe that the pros significantly outweigh the cons. Now, from a risk analysis perspective, you cannot negate the possibilities. It's the same concept with AI. So AI is too big to fail. AI is happening whether governments want it to or not. Yeah. You can try to, it's the same thing with Bitcoin, with cryptocurrency, too big to fail. You can try to regulate it, governments do. It will take hold regardless, because the potential, the applications, the pros significantly outweigh the cons. So and there are billions at stake in competing companies, right? When you reach that point, the technology is going to advance. So now it becomes a question of, okay, if we can't stop it, how do we make sure that it is rolled out in the least harmful possible way, right? Yeah. So that's where I'm not anti-regulation. I hate that regulation is an inhibiting factor for so many amazing technologies, but it also does a lot of good. Safeguards are necessary. Otherwise, this would be a very fast human civilization. We would have eradicated ourselves significantly a long time ago. So I do think you can over-regulate certain sectors, and that's obviously another topic for another time. But how I see this playing out is BCI is already too big to fail, and the pros significantly outweigh the cons. So it is going to happen. There is no possible scenario in my mind where advancement stops, right? Yeah. Where government steps in and says no more. For one geopolitical reason is, if, let's say, theoretically, the US decided to limit it, the tech companies would pick up their billions, trillions of dollars, and they would go where it was accepted. And those other countries would welcome them with open arms. Yeah. China is developing, they're making some big breakthroughs. Obviously, they don't really publicize everything that they're doing. You don't really know what China is capable of until it's already there. So their development procedures are really hush, but I do know for a fact that they are making leaps and bounds, and they are in the race with the US, if not ahead of the US in their development processes, which is something to take into consideration. So if you turned off the faucet in the US, you allow China to get the edge on us, which is just something that the US is not willing to do, in something that could have this big of an impact. So that's my take on it. It is going to happen. Now it comes down to, how do we roll it out? I do think you have to start looking at the risks. However, the biggest risk that I see, obviously you have to go through enough trials to know that the long-term feasibility of this, yes, we take somebody who has lost the ability to walk. We restore that capability by bypassing their biological inhibiting factors with direct brainwave stimuli. We know for a fact that over 5 years has no long-term negative effects. Okay, great. So we can roll this out. Fantastic. So I think we're going to do well from a medical application. From a commercial application, I think that has the biggest risk. When you see a significant amount of people with direct implanted neural interfaces, the possibility of hacking those neural interfaces has to be a concern. It just has to. So obviously that's very doomsday scenario, but my take is you have to continue developing the technology, and then that has to be a consideration, but it can be punted to we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, and just do the best that we can right now. So continue developing the technology, but it's not going to be problematic until later. The primary reason is if you hacked a phone, okay, you can access the data on it. You can access the messages, the information, right? But you can't force the person who owns that phone to necessarily do anything. You can't have them go blow up a train station. When you start implanting devices that are bypassing neurologic brainwave function, or motor function, you could have the potential to take over the ability for that person to walk, right? And you could make them walk somewhere theoretically. However, what you can't do with that same brain computer face is control their cognition. You can control their motor function because that's what the chip does. But he is very aware that he does not want to go here. So he would be able to alert anyone. He would be able to make a phone call and say, hey, I've been hacked. I'm going here. And we would be able to do something. When I say it's very futuristic for that to be a problem, we're talking about the ability to control cognition as well as motor function. That is a long way off. The early stages of this technology is going to be for specific applications. For commercial, it's primarily going to be wearables for the next at least 5 to 7 years, if not longer. So we have a good decade until we really need to solve the problem of security from a hacking perspective. So I do believe, that's just my take from a time frame and adoption and rollout time frame, that we really need to continue advancing the technology, make this a key consideration. But I think that is the biggest risk to BCI, and it's something that we don't necessarily have to deal with for another decade.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It makes sense. I guess for when you mentioned all of the various books and movies and TV shows that have taken advantage of this concept of the ethical and the more the social cultural implications of this technology, for Gen Xers like me, it's obviously the Terminator. But more recently, I think the show Black Mirror has done a really good job with playing with these ideas in terms of, there's one episode there where they had an implanted device that had the ability to serve as a hard drive for memories and interfered with how relationships were and how people did or didn't remember things and could be erased, as you say. Yeah, the prospect of this kind of thing happening and being hacked is quite worrisome, but it sounds like we're obviously a long ways off from that. But it is interesting to think about, because it is important to think in broad strokes around, again, just as analogous to the genetic technology and the potential for cloning, it's important to think in broad strokes around, okay, this is very promising technology, but it's a bit like Prometheus and the fire, and we have to be careful that we don't let it get out of control.
Of course. And when you get into genetics, the ethics around genetics, here's my take on it. Obviously, cloning is a little bit different, right? So what is the purpose of cloning? Okay, just to do it is not a good reason. We have the capability. You should take a look at what Dr. Sinclair over at Harvard Medical is doing, some of incredible research, but he's just one of many that are able to do this. We have the capability to take a skin cell and make it pluripotent and turn it into any other cell that we want. We could take that, and in a petri dish, we could take your skin cells and then turn the clock back, right? And we can essentially build an organ with those skin cells. It's incredible what you can do. So from a potential medical application, I feel like it's going to be incredible. Thousands of people die every single day waiting for an organ transplant, an organ donor, right? Imagine having the capability to, within 1 to 2 days or even intraday, take your cells and 3D print or grow another organ that your body will not reject because it is yours. It is from your own cells. You take the organ donation list completely off the table. Sorry to the black market, because that would be a horrible day for you. And you have the ability to save countless lives just from taking that technology. Now, obviously, the implications or ethical considerations for growing and cloning yourself. The primary reason, there's many reasons, but the primary reason is why. We don't have a reason to do that right now. And the expense is astronomical. So why would we go through an incredible expense, an ethical, moral dilemma for really no reason, until I do see a future. Again, this is very hypothetical, but I do believe there is a chance that it is feasible, where we actually have the ability to transfer your consciousness, transfer your memories, transfer your brain activity into that clone. When we have that capability, now it becomes, there's a reason to do it. So now that might bypass the negative potential, the negative inclination to not do it, and now you have a very legitimate reason to implement cloning technology. So that's my take on cloning. However, from a moral perspective, a lot of people are against gene editing. They say we shouldn't play God. They say we shouldn't do anything. From a moral approach, my argument is always, if I have the ability to save a life, I see that as a good thing. I have a moral obligation to take that technology that we've developed and save that life. If I can cure you of cancer with medicine, a lot of people would say that is a good thing. But if you do it with genetics, genetic engineering, synthetic protein, opinion on that is it's bullshit. If you have technological capability to save lives, countless millions of lives, I think you have a moral obligation to utilize that technology.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and I appreciate that. And I think the important thing is to just have space for the conversations, right? Have opportunity for experts like ethicists and philosophers to weigh in on these sorts of issues as well, right? Because then,
of course,
that'll inform the discussion that the technologists and the venture capitalists and the investors and everyone's putting in their advice and expertise into trying to steer the technology in a way that's going to be maximally beneficial for humanity.
Absolutely. It's important. And I do not know what that collaboration or panel would look like from a geopolitical perspective, right? Something along the lines of NATO, where multiple people get a say from various countries, but you also need various verticals, like you just said. You need the scientists to weigh in, and they're going to have a different perspective than the regulators. And the regulators are going to be different than the venture capitalists because they are just in it for the money. So I do not know what that looks like. I do think it's potentially necessary. My fear is it won't happen because, as I referenced earlier, when you realize that from an international point of view, if China develops the technology and starts implementing the technology, what happens when this collaboration of multiple countries comes in and says, you can't do this? So there's lots of considerations, and obviously I don't run the country, so I'm not going to crack the whip and get in there and say it. Just all I can do is share my perspective. It's going to be some significant hurdles to cross from a moral perspective for sure. I think we will get there, but the exciting thing is the technology is progressing very quickly, and we're seeing some exciting things. Now, how to go about implementing it, that is above my pay grade.
Yeah, for sure. No, and similarly, that phrase was in my mind as well. I think obviously there's huge implications in terms of national defense issues and all different kinds of things. But yeah, I think hopefully, and maybe this is overly optimistic, but I think tend to be a believer in the market actually sorting things out for the better in any event, with some necessary regulation, as you're referring to. But yeah, I know considerations in terms of our relationship with different parts of the world, like China in particular. I think that's something for sure to be conscious of. Just looking at time here, we're getting pretty close to the
Yes.
end point, but I thought maybe it would be good if you have a bit, another 5 or so minutes, if just to zoom out a little bit and maybe try to circle back a little to what we were talking about right at the beginning. And viewers and listeners are interested in your particular journey and what we were talking a little bit there about the importance of things like resilience. So maybe if you don't mind just speaking to that a little bit and helping us to understand for you in your journey, what's resilience been like for you? And in particular, how do you find that these days you handle stress and adversity in high stakes business situations?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, success is not linear and success is relative. What success is to me is going to be different to someone else. And I also think that success is a moving target, because I never thought that I am right now, right? And I think you set goals for yourself. You want to achieve X, and you usually have a reason for that. I want to achieve $100,000 a year so that I can take care of my family, and I don't want to be reliant on a job that could fire me tomorrow. Okay, that's great. But then what happens when you get there? For many people, that would be their end goal. They're comfortable. They achieve their version of success. And who am I to say you're thinking too small? I would not understand someone, right? I can't empathize. I can empathize because I understand their perspective, but I would never understand it, because for me, if once you reach that goal, what's next? I'm innately driven for more. So everyone's version of success looks different, but for that, I think it's a moving target for most entrepreneurs, because once they achieve that goal, like myself, they want more. And I don't think that is a greed or selfishness. I think that is just an innate desire, psychologically imprinted in them, whether that's genetics or circumstantial, that developed over time. They're just driven to more and more success. So a lot of people I've met and know a lot of people who sold a company for 10, 100, 150, $200 million. Most people on earth would think you're done, right? You have made it. But the interesting thing is, most of those people, some of those will take a hiatus, right? Take a year off, enjoy the fruits of your labor. You deserved it. But during that year, they're fidgety. They want to get back in because they crave more and more success. I do not think that comes from a mindset of greed. I think it's just a drive. So that's one thing that I will point out now. To get to your question about resilience, to be an entrepreneur that desires the level of success in the millions, right? And again, that doesn't necessarily have to be monetary based. It can be, I want to do X good for the planet, and therefore, if I achieve this, I will be rewarded monetarily. But money is not a factor for me, regardless what you're trying to accomplish. If your goal is big, the resilience factor for you has to be incredibly big to achieve it. By that, you are going to, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to take that step, you have to prepare yourself. Otherwise, you're going to quit the first time that you get hit with the inevitability of, and defeat doesn't have to be definitive, right? You can overcome defeat, but you will lose deals. You will lose contracts. You will be betrayed by close business partners. You will have people back out of the contracts. You will have people sue you. All of these things will happen to you at some point. It does not matter if you are a brick and mortar franchise owner or if you are Elon Musk, right? This is just the way that the game is played. You have to mentally fortify yourself ahead of time, knowing not what's going to happen, but that something is going to happen. And you have to have resilience built into your mindset that when things do not go my way, I'm going to do whatever it takes to bypass them. Now, the one thing, I know I'm droning on and we need to cut this time short, but the one thing that I would say is I was ready to call it quits more times than I could count. So when I say that build in a mindset of resilience ahead of time, that does not mean that you are not going to sit there with your hands in your face in your hands at some point and say, I'm done. I think every big entrepreneur has so much stress on their plate because as you get bigger, you have more responsibility. And that's your responsibility inevitably will grow, whether that's more employees, more mouths to feed, more investors to keep happy. And you can't keep everyone happy. It's just not going to happen. So when those things happen, it's very easy to want to give up. And the resilience factor is something that you need to prepare yourself ahead of time, but just realize that you can never really be prepared until you're actually in the situation. For me, unfortunately, there's really no one that I can point to, an actionable thing that I can say, this is how you get through it. It's all mindset, and you have to have an incredible amount of resilience to get through those hard times so that you can actually achieve what you want to accomplish. One of the things you hear a lot of people say, what is your why? I think if you don't have a reason, and regardless of what that reason is, it needs to be a strong one. Even if that reason is, I was picked on in school. I don't want to do that anymore. So I want to be physically fit. Okay, now I get hit with a disease that makes it very hard to get fit, right? Are you going to quit, or is the why strong enough to propel you to overcome that circumstance that hit you in the face and it wasn't your fault, right? So that's just one example of what I would say is resilience. Is if you're going to get started in anything, the why needs to be very powerful.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's a lot of wisdom there. I really appreciate that. Look, Steven, I really appreciate the conversation. I think it's great to finish on a positive note there for viewers and listeners. I think we can all learn from that, and it is very inspiring. So thank you so much once again. And we'll add any relevant links to the show notes. I'd invite people to put questions and comments in the comment section. And please do share this episode with anyone that you think might benefit from it. I think it's been a very interesting conversation. And once again, Steven, I just want to thank you very much for your time and your expertise and for sharing this. And it would be great to keep in touch.
Absolutely, Mike. It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for the stimulating conversation.
Okay. All right. Have a good one. Take care. See ya.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you so much once again for joining us today on the Neurostimulation Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed this fascinating exploration into the world of neuroscience and biotech as much as I did. If you found today's episode interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. It's the best way to make sure that you never miss an episode, and it helps us to reach more curious minds like ours. Also, if you think that today's episode might resonate with a friend, a family member, or a colleague, please share it with them. Knowledge is better when it's shared, and you never know who might find this information helpful or inspiring. For more details about the companies, the research, and the technology that we discussed today, please check out the links in the show notes below. You'll find everything that you need to dive deeper into the topic and to explore the various companies and technologies that we discussed today. I would also love to hear your thoughts. Please join the conversation in the comment section or reach out to us on social media. Your questions, ideas, and feedback make this podcast better. Finally, don't forget to tune into the next episode. It's going to be another exciting journey into the cutting edge of neuroscience and clinical neurostimulation. Thank you again for listening. I sincerely appreciate your time, your interest, and your attention. Take care, stay curious, be well, and I'll see you next time on the Neurostimulation Podcast.